Welcome back. Now I'm going to walk through all of the parts of task one, explaining exactly what it entails. So just another look at the different tasks. You can see task one is the literacy planning task, which happens before you teach in your student teaching. Task two is all about your teaching. That's where you're capturing the videos of yourself and writing a reflective commentary. Task three is your assessment. You're going to collect work samples, give feedback to your students, write a commentary to reflect. And task four is that math one that basically does everything in the literacy in a condensed form. So for task one, what you actually need to submit are 5 different parts of things. And this is how the final project in Inch 390 is structured. So part A is your context for learning, and there is a template. This should look familiar if you are in Inch 390. This is the context for learning, and these tables are where you are explaining the students in your class. Part B are your literacy learning segment lesson plans. And for your edTPA, this is just the lesson plans, not the instructional materials. All of those, confusingly enough, go into a separate file. Your lesson plans should not be any longer than 4 pages per lesson. So if you're submitting 3 lessons, you got 12 pages to work with. And when I'm scoring, I often see students who maybe their first lesson is 4.5, but their second lesson is only 3. As long as it balances out to 12, you should be okay. You should not have like 6-page lesson plans though. Part C is your instructional materials. These are the attachments to your lesson. These are your graphic organizers, your anchor charts, your support materials for your students. These are your page images if you're including them, or any sample graphic organizers you're providing. You cannot have more than 5 pages of these per lesson. And you'll see how the sample student that I'm going to share with you got a little creative and put more things on one page. Part D is for your literacy assessments, and this should correspond with each lesson. So you're going to put lesson 1 literacy assessments, and you'll have your exit ticket, and you'll have your rubric that you're going to introduce in lesson 1. Lesson 2, you'll have that rubric again. Lesson 3, you'll have that rubric again. You don't necessarily need to repeat your rubric. I see people doing this if they're using the same assessment over and over again. Sometimes I see folks who repeat it and include it for every lesson. Sometimes I see people including it just once. It does not affect the way that you get scored. And then, so all of your assessments get pulled out and put into Part D. And then the last part is a commentary paper that has a template. And this again just looks like an edTPA typical template. Remember when you're typing your answers that the answers go in between those brackets. A lot of people in my section started typing outside of these brackets. I don't know why the edTPA wants you to type your responses inside those brackets. It doesn't have anything to do with how it's scored or what I do as a scorer. It's just how they like it done. So make sure that you're typing inside that. So we'll take a look at that a little later. So that's everything you need to submit. And the edTPA is very, very picky about how things get submitted. They have specific file types. So you'll see in this class, in the Inch 390 class, we have been using Google Docs, and you might be working on Google Docs for student teaching. But Google Docs is not a choice on this list, so you've got to turn everything either into a Word doc or into a PDF for your actual edTPA submission. In this class in 390, you can keep your things as Google Docs, but everything needs to be Arial, size 11 point font, single spacing with 1-inch margins on all the sides. That's for your context for learning, and that's for your planning commentary. Notice there's no restrictions or file types or margin rules for your lesson plans, which is a good thing. You can stretch those margins out, or for your instructional materials or assessments. Those can look like whatever you want them to. So that's a good thing. But the commentary papers are super picky. Size 11, 1-inch margins. Just use the templates because that's how they're set up. Then they've got very strict page limitations. The only thing that's not limited, interestingly enough, is the literacy assessments. You can have as many as you like. They want everything, and therefore we want everything in 390 labeled in a very specific manner. Your lesson plans should be labeled Lesson 1, Lesson 2, Lesson 3. At the top of each lesson plan, start each lesson on a brand new page. Same thing for your instructional materials. You should separate it very clearly with a bold heading that says Lesson 1 instructional materials, Lesson 2 instructional materials, and kind of fill them in afterwards. Start on a fresh page when you're at a new lesson. You don't have to squeeze everything onto one page for each lesson. You can have multiple pages for each lesson, but at the start of a new one, make sure you're on a fresh page. And then same thing for assessments. Each assessment gets its own heading and you organize it around the lesson. So if you've got an exit ticket and a rubric happening in lesson 1, they're all going to go under the heading lesson 1 assessments. You might do your exit ticket on one page, rubric on the next, and then lesson 2 assessments, fresh page with a new heading. No more than 5 pages of key instructional materials per lesson plan. So sometimes people want to put all the instructional materials, every page of every book read in the entire segment. You don't have enough space for that. You have 5 pages. That first lesson is going to have a lot going on. We need to see your text pages. You don't need to submit text pages for the edTPA. That's a 390 specific thing. But in this class, we want to see the text pages that you're using during your modeling. We want to see a filled in graphic organizer, a blank graphic organizer, an exit ticket if you created one, or whatever that informal check-in is at the end of lesson 1. And you might include, the exit ticket goes with the assessments. My bad. That goes down here with no limit. But your instructional materials, you might have an anchor chart. You might have, you'll see the student has a vocabulary slip. You might have the pages of your text and your graphic organizer. Those are like the key things that you'll have. Just keep in mind you can't have any more than 5 pages per lesson, and they're all going in one long document, which I know is anti what we've been having you do in this program all along. You've been submitting lesson plans with all your attachments and everything and commentaries at the end. For your edTPA, it's all separated out. And in fact, you upload everything separately in the system when you're ready to submit. So when you're ready to do task 1, you're going to upload this doc separately. You're going to upload this doc separately, etc., all the way down. And then when you're done, they allow you to go in and check and just look at everything and make sure it looks the way you want it to. Okay, so let's talk about task 1. Part 1 is your literacy context for learning. I am not going to spend a whole lot of time on this because we have done this in our Int 390 class, and by the time you get to your student teaching, this should be very familiar to you. Just remember that whoever you describe in your context for learning, that's who you're aligning your differentiation, your modifications, your accommodations to. So any students with IEPs or 504 plans, you are legally obligated to meet their needs. If you've got students in your student teaching class with IEPs and 504s, they must be on your context for learning. This is where your English language learners go. You should probably talk about the students who are reading either above or below grade level in your class. Pretty much every class is going to have at least one student who's above or below grade level. They should go on this chart. Anything that you describe has to be returned to throughout your edTPA. And I'll show you as we dive in deeper where exactly those come in. So this table right here on this right-hand side is everything. Make sure you delete the examples. Some people leave the examples on. It gets a little confusing. What's an example, what's not. You don't need to italicize the text. That's just for the example. And remember, nothing math related goes in your literacy context for learning. This is just the literacy needs that your students have and how you're going to support them in their literacy. So you can see in the sample, they're talking about pre-teaching vocabulary for those ELLs. They're giving them some sentence structures to help them with their writing, things like that. We will return to this. So the sample that we're going to look at throughout the rest of this training, this is the context for learning. So it's worth noting here that the student who submitted this, and this was written by a student in a previous 390 class who went on to pass her edTPA with a really high score. I've sort of modified, so what you're seeing in this class is her Inch 390 assignment that was submitted for this class, but she used that as the premise for what was in her edTPA or how she wrote her edTPA, and she did really, really well. I've modified what you see a little bit, so I'm not sharing her name because I don't feel like it's super true to what she submitted, but it is based on a student who took 390, and I updated things to improve it even more. So you can see she's in an elementary school in the city. They're using the Engage New York modules as their curriculum. They teach 90 minutes of reading. There is ability grouping in this class. It's 5th grade. There are 20 students. You can see the gender split out. Remember, you have to do that for the edTPA. You don't have to do that for your 390 class. You can see there are 4 students with IEPs and ELA. There are test accommodations, time and a half, general additional time on assignments, directions are read aloud and repeated and paraphrased, additional wait time, written work submitted orally, dictated or word processed, etc. You can see there are no language needs in this class, no English language learners, and then there are a couple of behavioral needs and many, 19 out of 20 students who are reading below grade level in this 5th grade class. And there's a range of kindergarten to 3rd grade, which is significantly below grade level. So there should be lots of supports built into this for these students. Okay. Part B is the lesson plans, and the template for this at Nazareth College is our School of Education lesson plan template. So all of your lesson plans, even for your edTPA, should be on this School of Ed template. The handbook actually says that you should use whatever template is being used in the student teaching placement. That is fine as well. For this class, please use the School of Ed template. And when you get into your student teaching, I guess you have a choice, maybe talk it over with your seminar teacher that semester to see what template you should use for your edTPA. What you need to know is that there is no official edTPA template. They cannot be longer than 4 pages a piece without any attachments because those are separate. And you're going to have 3 to 5 lessons. To keep it simple in Inch 390, we're just looking at 3 lessons. So if you've got more than that, there's a little bit of confusion around this in my section. You should have 3 lessons for this class. You could flex out to 4 or 5, but don't make more work for yourself in your methods classes. Every lesson gets clearly labeled lesson 1, lesson 2, lesson 3, boldface centered at the top of the page. You're using the state adopted learning standards. These items are the things that the edTPA requires. 3 to 5 lessons, clearly labeled, state adopted learning standards. You should use the Next Gen ELA, use the standard and the text. If you're only using part of the standard, the handbook says that you can include just the relevant portion of that standard. You need a learning objective. We've taught you how to write learning objectives. You should all be comfortable and familiar at this point. You should include any formal and informal assessments that you're using, include the type of assessment. And this is a description of it, not the actual assessment, because the actual assessment goes in a different file called literacy assessments. You should explain the type of assessment, if it's a rubric, a checklist, or oral questioning with the students, and explain what is being assessed. So you don't need the actual instrument, just an explanation, which is why we put that assessment box on the lesson plan where you have to describe it. And then of course they want to see the instructional strategies and learning tasks. And in the manual it says include what the teacher does and what the students do and how you're going to support your diverse learners. This is what the manual says you must have on your lesson plan. So we in the School of Education took this information and used it to develop our School of Ed lesson plan, which is linked up here. So that's why our lesson plan has a box for your assessment. That's why our lesson plan has teachers will do and student will do because they want to know all of those things on your edTPA. So to lead you down that path, we created our template to be edTPA aligned. So what we're going to do now is take a look at the sample lessons that were provided. So if you click on this link, it will take you out to who I call the star student. And this is that student who had 390 in 2019 actually, and submitted these lessons for this assignment. So this student was in a 5th grade class, as we already saw. They chose determine a theme or central idea and explain how it's supported by key details, summarize a text. So this will be a summarizing edTPA. And you can see they chose the civic citizenship and government, and specifically we're looking at across time and place, different groups of people in the Western Hemisphere have struggled and fought for equality or civil rights. Many students have chosen this, this 5th grade standard. It's a pretty popular one, 5.6C, because many of you want to take that social justice slant in your teaching, your anti-bias lens, and that's amazing. So this might look very familiar to you. The nose, backward design is a little Nazareth College extra. This is not required for the edTPA, but we like to see it, so please include it for each lesson. She's got definition of synthesize, segregation, discrimination, and equality. Notice here, it's not just her social studies vocabulary. It's also her literacy strategy. So on lesson 1, you've got to describe, you've got to define that strategy for your students. Because remember, you're planning these lessons thinking that your students have never done the strategy before. They don't know what it means to synthesize. You're teaching that to them. That's the whole purpose of your lessons. So include that word. Plus, this is where your vocabulary goes for your social studies content. So I can already start to picture what this will be like. So she's teaching synthesize around segregation, discrimination, and equality. That sounds like a perfect match for this 5.6C. Students will understand that African Americans fought for equality and the same rights as white Americans for many years. So that's the social studies understand. Don't forget, these are literacy lesson plans first. So she's also got sometimes texts present new information, which can be combined with what I already know. That is what synthesize means. And that's important for your 5th graders to understand. Be able to do, a lot of folks in my class have to revise this one for the final. This is not, students will be able to synthesize. That's the last thing, the last lesson. For this first lesson, students will be able to watch the teacher modeling how to find key details within a text, how to combine that with their prior knowledge. They will be able to watch the teacher model explaining how their perspective has changed. Remember, in the first lesson, your students are not getting super engaged if you're following the gradual release. They're going to be able to watch you. Same thing with the objective here. It should be aligned to assessing their understanding of the strategy, not doing the strategy yet. So given a short quiz at the end of the lesson, modeling the literacy strategy, students will demonstrate their understanding of synthesizing by earning at least a 75% on a 4-question quiz. Now, in order to see that 4-question quiz, I can't just scroll down because this is just the lesson plans. That quiz will appear with the assessments. Remember that that is an assessment, not an instructional material. So you got to keep those things straight in your brain. Her assessment is an informal check-in that the students understand the strategy of synthesize. They're going to take a 4-question quiz. They need to get 3 out of 4 right. Okay, then we get to her lesson. This was already the sample in our 390 class, so I'm not going to go over in super detail, but just remember how much information is in this first lesson. So the student here is teaching the strategy synthesizing, and remember she's using that Freedom Readers from Nat Geo Explorer as her text. She provided all the images for that text in her instructional materials. She's got an anchor chart that she's starting with. She's got a vocabulary bookmark. almost all of her students are reading below grade level, so she really needs to put in a lot of supports for them. She has a sentence frame that will help them with the dialogue around this topic, and that's right on her anchor chart. She's introducing the vocab. She's introducing the graphic organizer. She's modeling how to synthesize as she reads aloud. She's putting in tons of good language. She's putting in lots of high quality examples. She's referring back to the anchor chart. Then, because this is 5th grade, she added an element of writing to make that reading and writing connection. And she's having them write a synthesis paragraph. And it's, again, using the sentence frame she taught them. At first I thought, then I read, and now I think. When you put together what you were thinking at the start before you read, and you put together what you already know, and you put that together with what you read, what you come up with is a new piece of information, a synthesis. Okay, and then she's introducing the rubric. She's not grading them with the rubric, but she's going to grade herself with the rubric, explain that they get to synthesize tomorrow, provide assistance on a exit ticket quiz if needed. So you can see she's got the full arc, lots of good details, lots of good descriptions going on. Follow-up activity, they're going to journal later to respond to that Freedom Writers article. And then here are her modifications or accommodations. This box must align back with that context for learning. So everyone that she put on here has to appear in that box. So the lesson uses universal design, universal supports to the process, are modeling the strategy, reading and thinking aloud. They're going to watch as she does the graphic organizer. She's again going to think aloud about that. They're going to get immediate corrective feedback, and they're going to be asked to explain the anchor chart. The anchor chart is a strong visual to help them. They're going to have a low stakes turn and talk. Modeling, thinking aloud, and the anchor chart help them in that low stakes assessment that she's given. Students with specific IEPs, so here are her specific IEPs. They're going to have the directions read aloud, directions repeated, additional time. That came directly from here. You can see she's got directions read aloud, extra time on assignments. Everything that she had in that context for learning appears here. Many students are below grade level readers, so she created a vocabulary bookmark with definitions for them. For the students who might struggle with locating key details, the standards aligned rubric will be altered so that they only have to find one detail. That really applies more to day 2. Students who have difficulties turning the rubric into actionable items will also get a checklist. So she's modifying the assessments for her students who have specific needs. With the vocabulary words, again, she's got that bookmark. So she's talking about the IEPs. She's talking about her students who struggle reading on grade level. And then she's got her general good universal designs. I'd say that for the most part, this chunk is really just good stuff that she's doing in this lesson for everybody. And this is a good place to describe that too. And the second half is really specific to that context for learning. Who's got IEPs, who's got language needs, who's reading below grade level. This is what she's doing in this lesson for those students. Then she refers to the attached documents and the synthesis quiz and all of the things that you'll need as the teacher. So that's lesson 1. Notice there's no attachments right here. They don't belong in the lesson. Lesson 2 is the same exact standards for literacy and social studies. She's keeping those definitions. She took out synthesize on this day. I probably would have left it in, but she's going to talk again about segregation, discrimination, and equality. Again here, I don't think her understand changed, but her be able to do did. This day, they're going to find key details within a text and combine them with prior knowledge to explain how their perspective has changed. Here on day 2 is where you can say the students will be able to do the strategy because they're doing it on this day. And you can even say with a partner or in a small group or in a whole class teacher directed guided practice. If you're going to keep control of that guided practice, you can do it that way. So they're getting a new text on this day, and given the first 20 pages, students will demonstrate their understanding of synthesizing by constructing a paragraph and earning at least 10 out of 12 in the rubric. So day 2 is where that rubric comes in. And you could even include the words in a small group or working with a peer. Students will be able to demonstrate their understanding. You don't have to, but if you want to distinguish how day 2 is different from day 3, you could do that. The assessment, when conferencing with the teacher, students and the teacher will go over their paragraph together. So she is going to meet with them and she's going to help them self-assess with that rubric, and it's part of their informal assessment. So even though she's using the rubric, it's really done in an informal way, and her goal is to meet with all of the students to have a conference. So then we can see this lesson is a bit shorter. You don't have to go into quite as much detail, but she is reminding them at the start, intro, what does discrimination mean? Now the students are getting engaged. They're going to read a new book today. And then there's a reminder of the synthesis strategy in the anchor chart. So referring back to those materials that were introduced in the first day, going over the sentence starter, going over the rubric, showing them the paragraph that she wrote the day before, the graphic organizer she filled out, the rubric from the day before, reminding them of how everything went. Quick thumbs up or thumbs down to check in with the students here. Students will listen and participate in the thumbs up. Then there's the guided practice. So this is where the students get to have a go of it. And you can do this in a couple different ways. You can continue whole class with you still at the front of the room guiding them through, but then letting them fill out the graphic organizers by themselves. You can do the read aloud still for your students. And in this class, it's probably a good idea. Notice, read pages 1 through 20 aloud. She's got 19 students reading below grade level. She's not just letting them go to read the text. She's going to still read aloud to them. And she's going to stop and ask guiding questions to check that they understand. And they're going to stop to think, pair, share frequently after the reading I was thinking. That's her strategy. So she's going to stop and encourage them through the strategy. This is not free for all day where all the students just go off, partner up. It's still a guided practice. In this lesson with 20 students below grade level, 4 students with IEPs, lots of needs in this class, she's still very much in control of this guided practice. The students are filling out those graphic organizers and sharing aloud, so it stays teacher-led. Now, if you don't have as much needs in your class, you don't have 19 out of 20 below grade level, you could also do this in small groups with students, and maybe you keep a small group of 5 or 6 who are reading below grade level, and that's how you manage your students with needs. You could partner your students up and choose your partners based on ability. So you've got one who's stronger with one who needs a little bit more support. However you'd like to do this, use your context for learning and the students that you wrote in your class as a guide. So in this class, it makes sense for her to stay as the guide, helping them to complete their graphic organizers. They're still doing the thinking and doing the work by themselves, and they're filling in those boxes, but she's kind of taking it step by step for this group. So then they're going to write their synthesis paragraph, and they're going to use that scoring rubric to give themselves a grade. There's a checklist for students who need it, students with IEPs or students with language needs. Some are allowed to word process. That's going right back to her context for learning and the needs for her students. So you can see how she's sort of written in universally designed good practices along with the modifications and accommodations. So it would be super clear for a substitute how a student with an IEP is getting accommodations in this lesson, how a student who has a bit more need for writing or an IEP modification to word process, it's right embedded in the lesson plan for this. And then closing, they're going to grade themselves with that rubric. They're going to talk about it and see if they have any questions, and that's how the lesson ends. The follow-up will be another journal entry about what Ida B. Wells did that made her such an important person. So that's social studies content. Again, here with the modifications, starting off with the universal design, they've already seen it modeled. They're now getting a chance at guided practice. Guided practice is one more step in good universal design to give your students a chance to learn before they have to prove themselves in the application, before they have to do it alone. For those who are above grade level, they can work with a partner. So she does have that one strong above grade level student. So maybe they'll get to choose somebody to work with. Then it's all about the students with the IEPs. The text is being read aloud because there are so many students with needs in this class. Some will have directions repeated. Many are below grade level. So again, she's going to refer to that bookmark. For students who are having difficulty with locating details, the teacher-made rubric will be altered for them. So she's got a modified rubric for students who have IEPs, who have difficulty with locating details. They're going to have a checklist for writing their paragraph if they have an IEP or a need, and then word processors. So we see a lot of things repeated from that first day here, but there are some new things, particularly around how guided practice looks a little bit different in its support for students. So we've got a new text, we're going to use sticky notes and the rubric. All right, lesson 3 is usually the shortest lesson. This one's only 2 pages long. And that's because everything pretty much stays the same. What might change if you've got new vocabulary, maybe she's got the same understand, and now find key details. This is actually the same as day 2 because pretty much they're doing the same thing. They're just going to get to do it by themselves. So given the next chunk, so you can see on day 1, she had her Freedom Readers text, and on days 2 and 3, she split this Ida B. Wells text, and they're reading a chunk of it at a time. So they started it on lesson 2, they're going to finish it here. And again, they're going to demonstrate their understanding of synthesizing by making a paragraph using a rubric. 10 out of 12 is the expectation. So this time she's going to collect those graphic organizers in their paragraphs and score them with the rubric. And again, she's hoping to conference with all of her students. This lesson would probably take much longer if you're going to conference with 20 students. This might take a couple of days, and that's okay. So introduce, what does equality mean to you? Remember yesterday, talk with an elbow buddy. We read Ida B. Wells. Now we're going to read the second half, reminding them of that synthesize and anchor chart. This could really be the same as lesson 2, your intro, reminding them of what you did, what you saw on day 1, and what you did yesterday with a small group or with the whole class. And then the independent application is here. So she is passing out a new graphic organizer, asking them that compelling question, what does equality mean? She's going to start by filling in, at first I was thinking, encouraging them to work independently. So what are you thinking at the start? Students who are above grade level will be off. They can read independently. They can do the graphic organizer by themselves. The on grade level and below grade level, again, are going to stay in that whole group. Remember, when you've got so many students with needs, you've got students reading below grade level. These are not reading comprehension in the sense that I'm assessing you on, can you comprehend the story? These lessons are to teach them a strategy, in this case, synthesizing. And that's what you're assessing, can they synthesize? So it's okay to read aloud the text to them, because what you really want to know is, can they synthesize? Not necessarily, can they read the text by themselves? This is not like a fluency lesson. Okay, so then something about the students with IEPs. scaffold for tracking the key details, sticky notes, read aloud. So a little bit more guidance here for these students who have lots of needs. But generally they're filling in the graphic organizer by themselves. And then independent application of the written paragraph, she's still pulling those students who have specific needs. They get that writing checklist, they get that individualized support from her. And then at the end, she's going to collect those graphic organizers, score them, provide supports for any students who are experiencing difficulty. And that's what you would use for your assessment task, task 3, for your edTPA. You would collect your graphic organizers, analyze the results, and complete the task 3 writing. They're going to do another journal to talk again about IWLs and what they've learned. And you can see, I won't read this box, but many of the same accommodations, they're doing the same kind of work. So it makes sense that they would have the same accommodations on this last day. So those are her 3 lessons, and you can see she's at 10. She had 12 possible pages. She used all 4 for lesson 1, and then I think 3 and 2. So she's well below the 12-page limit for the lesson plans. So that is a close look at the sample lessons for this segment. What I'm going to show you next is something that I've actually created for myself as a scorer. So when you're trained in scoring, the first tool that they tell you to open is something that looks kind of like this. It's actually expanded for all of the tasks, but I'm showing you just task 1. And this is a quick scoring level chart for each of the rubrics involved. And I'm going to go into the rubrics a little bit later. But what I like to do is a piece that I've added, and I'm going to show you how I would have filled this in for this student. So I know when I'm scoring an edTPA, I've got to keep track of what happened in lesson 1, what happened in lesson 2, what happened in lesson 3, what are the assessments being used for each lesson, what are the students' needs, are there IEPs, are there language learners, are they below grade level, what's the central focus? This one is comprehension. What's the essential strategy? This is synthesize. Related skills, if I had to guess, this would be using what I already know, using what I've read in the text, combining it to put together a new thought. And then the language function demands and supports. This doesn't come until later, and we'll talk about that later, but this is the notes section that I always use when I'm scoring a new edTPA. So the next thing I look at after the lesson plans are the instructional materials. These are one file for all of them, no more than 5 pages per lesson. These should help explain what you and the students are doing throughout the lesson. You don't have to repeat the items. One time is enough. Lots of people like to, if you did the graphic organizer in 1, you put it with 2. You don't have to do that. Your scorer is going to understand that it's the same. Everything should be labeled very clearly, lesson 1, lesson 2, instructional materials, and they should be in the order of appearance of each lesson. Don't include your assessments here. They are in part D. And actually, I think the sample student included the assessments. That was an error. Those should be taken out. Do include handouts, copies of readings, samples of your modeled material, slides that you might use, homework assignments, follow-up activities, interactive whiteboard. Just know that the edTPA scoring platform is not interactive with the internet. And what I mean by that is you can't embed links and you can't embed videos. So if you want to reference a YouTube video, you've got to make sure the URL is spelled out. If your scorer really wanted to go out and watch it on the internet, they could, but it's not going to pop up as a linkable file. So you can't include like, go to this website, hyperlink text. You have to spell out the entire URL, and there's a strong chance that your scorer is not going to copy and paste. So just be aware, anything that you're referencing from the internet, you have to spell out the URL. So the sample instructional materials for this grade 5 lesson are found here. So everything that this STAR student talked about, we should be able to see here. So here's that anchor chart. At first I was thinking, then I was thinking, and now I'm thinking. You can see she made it really pretty. When you combine what you know with what you're reading, your thinking changes, and that is synthesizing. Here's that vocabulary bookmark with those words that appeared very clearly on her lesson plan in the no box. She's got her synthesized graphic organizer. This aligns with the anchor chart. At first I thought, then I read, now I think. And the students would write their paragraph on the back side. Then we've got the Freedom Readers copies of the pages. So this link does link out. Remember that a URL link like this wouldn't work. You want to put the URL, but she includes the actual page images here. So we see the text. Remember, we want to see at least lesson 1, your full text, so that we can see how your modeling goes. Then we have the teacher's sample for what would be modeled in her lesson. At first, I thought reading meant understanding the words I see. Then I read Freedom Readers, and I learned that slaves weren't allowed to read because owners thought that they would want freedom if they could read. I also read that reading was a skill that could help freed slaves get better jobs. Now I think that reading really means having some power and some freedom, because knowing how to read changed the lives of so many slaves. So if you dig in and read lesson 1, this is what she was teaching the students to do. This is the rubric that's being introduced, and she scored her writing as an 8 out of 12. And then you can see lesson 2 is here. So she is providing the pages for lesson 2. Here's her lesson 3 materials, and this includes the rubrics. So again, rubrics shouldn't be part of your instructional materials, although she's kind of teaching the students how to score herself. So maybe this is helpful. Mastery is a 6 out of 9. Here's that checklist to support the students in their writing. This would definitely appear as instructional materials, and this is for lessons 2 and 3. So there's a little bit of overlap, but there's a little lack of clarity in the instructional materials, and some assessment materials were put into this instructional materials document. So it's not perfect, but it certainly is good enough, and it would do really well on the edTPA. So those are the instructional materials. And then the literacy assessments. So all of these are in one file again. There's no limit to how many you can have. Include every written assessment and directions for any assessments that are given orally. So if you're using comprehension questions asked out loud, make sure you provide those here, and how you would score your students on those. Everything gets labeled clearly in order of appearance. Include only the blank copies. No student work samples here. That's for task 3. And make sure that you are monitoring the student learning of all your related skills and your essential literacy strategy at multiple points across the segment. For your planning commentary, you're going to have to write about how you're doing this. So it's not enough to just assess that your students can do the strategy, synthesize. You also have to repeatedly monitor throughout your lessons that they can do the related skills. So can they do all of the things that you are setting out to teach them, the strategy and the skills? That's why we had you write your rubrics the way that we did in this class, which included the strategy and the skills broken down. And anyone that gets a modified assessment, you should have a modified assessment attached in your literacy assessment. So we should see that for the sample student, because we know she has students with needs. So here's her exit ticket. It's a 4-question quiz. She's looking for 3 out of 4. We can see the correct answers. I imagine many of you have a similar quiz. Remember, the exit ticket, you're not asking them to synthesize yet. You're making sure they understand what synthesize means. Here is the assessment, the teacher made synthesizing rubric, looking for 8 out of 12. Here is that modified rubric for specific students. And here is the checklist to support students again. So there's some overlapping, double dipping of instructional materials and assessments. Make sure you remove the exit ticket and the rubrics from your instructional materials. They don't belong there. The sample student put them there. I left them because it's pretty nitpicky. Okay, the last thing we're going to look at before we take a little break is the planning commentary. This is the part that makes everybody feel really confused, and this is the hardest part, because up till now, it's really just planning good lessons, creating good instructional materials, and having good assessments. You all, by the end of this class, will be really good at that. You are really good at that at the midpoint of this class. This commentary paper is what makes people really nervous about the edTPA. It has a template. You can find it here. This is what you should use for your final project. And in this, basically, all you have to do is include responses to all parts of the prompt. And this is what makes people crazy in the edTPA. Pay attention to all the verbs. If they ask you to identify, that means just tell it. You don't have to explain. If they ask you to describe, that means give some more detail about the thing you identified. If they ask you to explain, you need to go into more detail about how you planned or how you did something. And justify means to rationalize, tell, usually with research, why you planned the way that you did. Finally, when the prompt says to cite evidence, they literally want you to talk about individual pieces of evidence that show what you are describing. And this is where I think people get caught, and this is where the difference between the rubric scores can happen, whether you get a high one or a lower one. Watch out for and or questions, and is often how you get in the higher rubric zone. The single best piece of advice I have for you is to write your commentary using the understanding rubric levels file and the next part of this talk, where I'm going to go into the different rubric levels and how to write to respond to them. So this is the basic commentary file. There's 2 pages here and there's one little box here. And basically they're asking you to talk about your central focus. For all of you, your central focus will be comprehension, reading comprehension. They want to know about that essential literacy strategy, the related skills, and the reading and writing connections. This is why your whole entire project in this class is structured around an essential literacy strategy and related skills. It's because that's how the edTPA is structured. So talk about it here. You finally get a chance to explain it. They want to know the knowledge of your students that you use to inform your teaching. So part 2 is all about who's in your class, what do they know, what are their backgrounds, and what IEPs or 504 plans or English language learners or students with needs do you have? This, anytime you see this like grayish beigey box, it's reminding you, don't forget, this is an area where you really have to talk about your students with IEPs and 504 plans and English language learners and struggling readers. If you don't do that, you will automatically get the lowest score you can get on the edTPA, which is a 1. So anytime you see this box, consider the variety of learners. Auto 1 if you don't do that. Number 3 is about supporting your students. So they want to know so here you describe who's in your class. Now say what you're doing to accommodate your teaching for them, to modify your teaching to accommodate for them. Justify their prior learning and what you know about them personally as a means for planning your instruction. Be super explicit. Describe and justify your strategies and plan supports. How are you meeting the needs of your whole class, individuals? And here's one of those and or. If you do all the things, you get more points. So whole class, individuals, and groups of students. And then what are some common misconceptions or developmental approximations? We did this in 320. That's the things that your students might just naturally have a hard time with. What are your 5th grade students in this class probably going to struggle with in your lesson, and how are you going to head that off before it happens? Finally, we've got to talk about language demands. So this is something we haven't done yet in this class, and it's time to talk about it. I will go painstakingly in detail through what a language function and these additional language demands are. So this whole question is about that. And then the last question is about your assessments. How are you monitoring your students' learning of the strategy and the related skills? They want to know about both. And again, that's why we had you write your rubrics the way we did. Notice this is a spot where they're checking for your students with IEPs, the variety of learners they want to know. Okay, so that is task 1 in a nutshell. I'm going to stop now and give you a break. Stand up, stretch, catch your breath, take all of that in, and we're going to come back and talk about the rubrics. This is where we get into the micro level of what you actually have to write on your commentary paper and how you're actually going to pass the edTPA. So come on back when you're ready for that.